For this problem, they want you to find the x and y intercepts of the graph of the function f of x equals blah, 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 blah. This is an absolute value equation. Whoops, trying to draw that. Absolute values. So I know that my graph for absolute values is usually a v. Because I've got this -3 in front of it, that means I know it's going to be an upside down v. Now, when you have a graph, there's 3 ways this v can be plotted on the xy axis. You can have it where it goes something like this, where it has 2 x coordinates and 1 y. You can have it where it looks something like this, where it has 1 x-intercept and 1 y. And then you can have something like this, where it only has 1 y-intercept and no x's. All right, so 3 different situations. But you have to remember that when you are crossing the x-axis, the y coordinate is always 0. So for both of these, the y coordinate would be 0. So I'm going to come up here and remember that f of x is really the same thing as y. So I'm going to stick the 0 right there. And then I'm going to solve this thing for x. Okay? So let me erase this mess. Okay. And the first thing I'm going to do is subtract the 3 so that cancels. 0 minus 3 is a -3. And then, since you have a -3 next to the absolute value, I am going to divide it off, because -3 next to that does mean to multiply. However, you cannot distribute over absolute value symbols. They're not considered grouping symbols. Grouping symbols are parentheses, brackets, and braces. Those you can distribute over, okay? Absolute values are not grouping symbols, so you cannot distribute on that. Anywho, so what to do to one side, I'm going to do to the other. That cancels out. Technically, this becomes 1 over 1, which is just 1. And -3 divided by -3 is positive, oops, wrong color, +1, and that's equal to the absolute value of x minus 1. And now here you have to realize that absolute value equations always have 2 possible answers. That's because the stuff inside the absolute value, it could have been, in order for it to equal this 1 out here, this could have been a 1. Absolute value of 1 is 1. Or it could have been a -1, because the absolute value of a -1 is also 1. What we're trying to figure out is, what's x? What number for x right here is going to make this a 1, and what value of x is going to make it a -1. So that's where we split it into 2 equations. We are going to say, okay, either the x minus 1 is equal to a +1, or the x minus 1 is equal to a -1. Because it can be either a 1 or a -1 before you take the absolute value. And now just solve each one of these. I would add 1 to both sides, bada bing, and I get x is equal to a 2. And here I would add 1 to both sides, so that cancels, and x is equal to a 0. Let's see, enter the x-intercepts in order of increasing x value. If there are no x-intercepts, enter not applicable in both answers areas. Express answers as points A, B. So they want them as ordered pairs, and they want them in increasing x value. So my smallest x coordinate would be the 0. So it's going to be 0, 0 for that one. And the other one, x is equal to 2, is 2, 0. Boom, there you go. Now, the y-intercept. Well, the y-intercept is when x is equal to 0. This will be just a little easier because all I'm going to have to do is plug and chug. So I am going to stick the 0 right here where the x is. Oh, I don't know why I'm putting the 0 over there. That's supposed to be f of x, which is really the y coordinate. So this is going to be -3. And I'm going to stick the 0 right there. Now, here we go. I'm going to start with inside the absolute value. 0 minus 1 is a -1. Then I'm going to take the absolute value. The absolute value of -1 is +1. Now, once I take the absolute value, my absolute value bars go away, but that -3 that's next to them still means to multiply. So either put parentheses in or put a dot in here, you know, whatever you need to remind yourself that you're going to have to multiply, because that's the next step. -3 times 1 is -3, and -3 plus 3 equals 0. Now, if I had been paying attention, I would have noticed up here that the x-intercept, this x-intercept is 0, 0. That's the origin. That is the only point that is both the x-intercept and the y-intercept. So, there you go. And just to show you that I'm not totally crazy, I'm going to type them in here. This is 0, 0, and 2, 0, and 0, 0. And hit the how did I do button. There you go. You don't call me the math goddess for nothing. Actually, I call myself that, so I made it up years ago. All right, done.